What's happening? Happy Friday. Strong like mom. Happy Friday. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome into our Friday Q&A. So, hope everybody's had a good week. Got my YouTube and Instagram up, so we're good to go. Let's talk about some stuff. So, again, it kind of comes down to what you guys want. What's on your mind for this week on our strength and performance and training and fitness Q&A here. So again, as always, whatever you want to talk about, use the comment section. I'll be happy to kind of talk about a little bit more on anything that you guys want. Waving back at everybody, obviously, always good to see the regular suspects in here. So welcome back in. Um, Again, I didn't get any emails from anybody this week on specific topics that they want to talk about. I'm always open to that. If you're thinking about something throughout the week and you want to send me a quick email, you're always welcome to do that. My contact info should be on the website somewhere. So, Johnny Quick, what's going on? Hope you're doing well. Good to see you in here again. Happy Friday. So let's talk about some stuff, right? So any sort of info fitness related, feel free to let me know. My email, really easy. It's Dave, D-A-V-E, Dave at brookbushinstitute.com. So that's a pretty easy email for everybody to remember. So let's see, what do we got here? Been good in our comment section. All right. Um, As always, I know we talk a lot about assessment, right? I think that's kind of the common conversation here. So I'm going to kind of stay away for that one for now, unless there's any sort of assessment questions that you guys have. But more so, I want to talk a little bit about the programming side of things. So what to kind of set up, how to set up, and how to program for a specific client. So um, we have to keep in mind that there's going to be a specific progression that we should do for our clients or patients that you work with. So we want to start, and we talked a little bit about this last week, but want to start in that stabilization endurance phase. We're looking at developing some control of that muscle tissue, control of those joints, control of that movement. So that in stability endurance phase would be the first place to start for any of your new clients or patients or whatever you're working with. So the other common misconception that we have with that is that stability endurance phase is like too easy. Well, it shouldn't be, right? We have to go back to kind of those acute variables and say, all right, it's going to be somewhere between 12 to 20 reps, right? Something along the lines of a 3-2-1 tempo. And those tempos are actually going to be coming out here on the website soon, talking about kind of the interset rest intervals and tempos and how they play a major impact on adaptations and the ones that you should choose according to the phase that you're in. So that 3-2-1 tempo really changes the game a little bit. I think that's one of the other pieces that people miss in that stability endurance phase is that they're just kind of going through motions or pick a weight that's just super light for them. We still want to go something in the lines of 12 to 20 reps, but picking a weight that you can't do more than 20 reps of, right? Or really more than 25 reps of. That's just too light and it doesn't create enough of a stimulus to create some of that change, right? That change that we want. From there, we got our general strength hypertrophy phase, right? So the loads increase a little bit. So 6 to 12 rep range. Tempo is a little different. It's a 2-0-2 tempo. And then we can progress even further if you want, if your client or patient wants that, we can go into that max strength side of things. So that max strength now is a little bit more of just kind of the 1 to 5 rep range, kind of go from there, right? And then there's power, and power is really reserved for those athletes. If anybody's working with those athletes, that's where that power phase comes into play. There's a couple different types of power, but maximal power, like I said, reserved for those athletes, and it really looks a lot different. The programming for a max power phase looks a lot different than what a traditional kind of weight training or resistance training program would look like. So, um, and with a great question off the bat, thank you. We talked about sumo deadlifts. What are the negatives? So the negatives with sumo, and again, I think I mentioned briefly, yes, sorry, last week about the sumo stance, right? So if your goal is to compete in a competition, right? You're going to find that most of the competitors take that wide sumo stance. So one of the positives of that sumo stance is that you have less distance to move that weight, right, in a deadlift, right? So if you think about that, traditional stance, you have kind of a far distance to move, but if you take a wider stance, you reduce that distance. So that is one positive of that sumo stance. So it potentially could help you, lift maybe the heaviest weight that you could lift. However, the negatives end up being kind of going back to some of that physiology side of things. When you go into that wide stance, we change that length tension curve of the gluteal muscles, right? So they're the primary movers in that deadlift. So when you take that sumo stance, you've now shortened those muscles, right? So that wide stance of abduction and get a little maybe external rotation there at the hip. Right now, the glute max, glute med is in a shortened position, and a short muscle is not a very strong muscle. Again, go back to that length tension curve. So the prime mover of that lift is now set up in a disadvantageous position. That's kind of one of the big negatives there. Again, we have to kind of weigh risk versus reward here, and say, do I want my prime movers in the best possible position that they can be in? Well, then I'm going to take that traditional stance, right? The traditional stance is also arthrokinematically and osteokinematically more sound than the wide sumo stance. You have a little bit less potential pressures on that hip and on that SI joint and on that low back, and all those things kind of come into play as well. So I would say that the majority of the people that I work with and I train and I coach and whatever that you've maybe even that you guys have worked with, that traditional stance is going to serve them better, even though the weights or the loads may not be as heavy as they could go if they're looking for a PR. You're just setting them up for success or better success, let's say, in that traditional stance, right? So the negatives in my eyes of a sumo stance outweigh the positives or any benefits to a sumo stance deadlift or sumo stance squat or anything along those lines. I just think unless that's the sport that you're in, I think everybody should move away from that and go back into kind of a more traditional stance. And I think what we're starting to see a little bit of a shift here in, especially in the strongman competitions and things like that. If you watch the world's strongest man or some of his old videos, because he's really slimmed down now, but some of his old videos when he was doing his heavy, super, super heavy deadlifts, he was in a more traditional stance, and he's a taller guy. He's 6'8", right? So um, that traditional stance just allowed him to produce like that much more power to get the 1,000-pound deadlift off the floor. So hopefully that's helpful. As for some studies on the Brooke Bush Institute, there's certainly studies on the glute max and glute medius, and obviously what happens with those positionings there in that kind of length tension curve. There's also, I think, some studies in the hip bridge course and the deadlift course that kind of references to his optimal positioning and alignment and all of that. So hopefully that's helpful. And thank you for that good question. And I'm waving back. Everybody is waving right back at you. Um, you know, but keep firing away. Keep firing away some questions here. I'm happy to kind of talk more on that topic, or if you want me to kind of expand a little bit more on something else, let me know. Right. Again, with I think when it comes down to if you do end up working with those maximal strength athletes, right? The strongman slash um, quote unquote power lifters, even though it's not true power that they're producing. Um, if you do work with those individuals, train traditional stance for the majority of their training, and then maybe pre-competition you can start to play around with some of that stance and kind of go from there. Maybe that wide stance or sumo stance pre-competition, if that's what they want to pick, or if that's what their stance wants to be during competition. But like I said, for the most part, um, training. Training traditional stance would be my go-to. Is a pistol squat easier on the SI joint than a split squat? So I'm clarifying what you mean by a split squat, but if you mean split squat as in like that kind of like lunge position and staying in that lunge position, coming down, coming up. No, because the pistol squat's going to be a single leg movement, so that's going to require a lot of force, a lot of tension, a lot of obviously it's your whole body weight on one leg. So that's certainly going to put a greater demand on that whole system compared to that split stance where you have kind of that back leg working as a mini kickstand. Um, so I would say, pistol squats are going to be at the higher end of the difficulty of that progression of a squat progression. Now, if you're talking about Bulgarian or where that back leg is up onto something, I tend to avoid that. And there's a couple of reasons why, but one of the reasons is actually that synergistic dominance that we see with the bicep femur, the hamstring muscles, right? So there is actually a little bit of talk on that on our kind of triple extension progression course in the strength training progression section. There's a little bit of talk on that, on how that back leg kind of being up onto something does create a little bit of that synergistic dominance of the hamstring and can put a little bit of pressure, put that pelvis in kind of an awkward position, and certainly could increase that demand of that SI joint. So if that's what you were talking about, then I would opt kind of out of that one and go into that kind of split stance position. And lunge positions, all of those are awesome. Like I'm happy with those, like reverse lunge, lateral lunges, even walking lunges, I tend to like better. Or I would kind of advise um, to be put into a program before, or really, instead of that Bulgarian or that elevated rear foot elevated lunge, simply to help reduce some of that synergistic dominance and reduce some of that weird, awkward kind of pelvic SI positioning there. So hopefully that's helpful. And again, um, you have to make that decision based on your client, based on their ability level, based on how long you've been training and working with them. There is no kind of one size fits all. We have to make sure the modifications fit the goals. We have to make sure the modification fit the client or patient, and kind of go from there. Right. So this is where I throw stuff out there, and then you have to take that and kind of digest it and internalize it and say, this is what's going to be best for the person that I've been working with for X amount of weeks, months, years, whatever it is. Uh, let's see. What's my opinion using a loop band or a mini band above the knees when doing squats and deadlifts? So, good question, Adonis. And obviously, good to see you in here again. I'm not a huge fan of using that while you're training, right? So while you're doing the squat or the deadlift above the knees. It's not a bad thing. I just don't do that a whole lot. I prefer to do that during the activation, the corrective exercise, kind of warm up side of things. So I'll do, body weight squats with the band above the knees. I'll do your mini band shuffles, clamshells, all those movements with the band around the knees. But when I go under load, if I go, okay, let's put some significant weight on my back, if in a squat, or let's put some significant weight in that deadlift or on that deadlift, I probably wouldn't add that mini band above the knees, right? However, I would say doing a deadlift, a great variation that actually fires up glute max even more is putting a super band, one of the big bands, around the hips and having a posterior pull. So if you can kind of picture this in your head, you have that big band attached to something that's not going to move, like a cable rack or something, right? Something that's like fixed into the ground. That's going to go around your waist, right? So around your hips, rather. So not around your stomach, but right around the hip bones. Um, get some walk out, get some tension on there, and then that'll kind of give you this posterior pull. It'll try and pull you backwards, so then you can kind of grab that dumbbell, barbell, hex, whatever you're using. The hex bar might not work, but whatever you're using there, and you can do that deadlift with a posterior pull. And like I said, that'll fire up glute max activity in there. So I'm a bigger fan of something like that. Right, like I said, that could be use dumbbells, use kettlebell, use the barbell. You can do a lot of different progressions there with that posterior pull. That's a great one. That's actually a great exercise to kind of put into somebody's program who has that dysfunction of anterior pelvic tilt, right? So if you are working with somebody who's got an anterior pelvic tilt, again, based on their ability levels and what they can manage, that's a nice little trick to add to their routine, right? Their leg day routine or their glute routine or something along those lines. So hopefully that's helpful, Adonis. Like I said, mini bands great for the activation side of things, right? And all the activations or the corrective exercise component is getting those muscles to be in a better position to fire when you then go into your regularly scheduled weight training program. So uh, you see the clickbait stuff on Instagram all the time of mini band shuffles aren't going to get your glutes bigger. And yeah, you're right, right? So that's not going to cause muscles to get bigger, but it will fire those muscles, improve firing rate, improve that synchronization of that glute muscle, and it will prepare you or better prepare you for the weight training session that you're going to do, which will get those muscles bigger. So don't be fooled by some of those clickbaity things of like, oh, I've been doing it wrong my whole. No, keep doing what you're doing. Keep a solid foundation of do your activations, use the tools that you have for your activation techniques, and then go back to the weight training concepts, that progressive overload, right? That is an important component of getting tissues to adapt, right? One of the things I talk about in our corrective exercise course, which anybody in New York, I'll see you in, if you're signed up, I'll see you in a week. But one of the things that I talk about in that corrective exercise course is the mini band shuffles that you see people do with like the yellow or green bands, and they've been doing it for years. That's not doing anything. So even though that's like kind of in a corrective exercise piece, that resistance or that exercise isn't challenging enough to make any significant impact or any difference in what they're trying to achieve. So the same goes for weight training, goes for the corrective exercise side of things as well. You have to give your body a stimulus to adapt to, right? When do you know when somebody's ready for lunges? I've had in the past experience where a patient wasn't ready and their knee ended up getting swelled up. Yeah, so that's a good question, Johnny. So again, it really becomes a, let's call it a touch and go situation. I don't know the clients that you've worked with. I don't know their capacity, their ability level. And again, there is no like, they've been working with me for 4 weeks. Now we're ready for lunges. It's very, very individualized. Some people can kind of pick up those movements, no problem at all. Other people, it might take a little bit longer for them to get comfortable, get the movement down, the tissues to adapt. So there is no like right answer for that. But what you did, and we all have did, whether what we have all done is, well, whether we're personal trainers or massage therapists or chiros or PTs or athletic trainers, we've all made somebody. Uh, let's use this term loosely. We've all hurt someone, right? So everything that we do as professionals is not always perfect, and we don't always get the outcomes that we want. So, every personal trainer probably had a client who kind of did a deadlift wrong and their back kind of flared up on them for a couple days or a week or whatever. Every PT or chiro or massage therapist may have done some sort of technique, or athletic trainer done some sort of technique that irritated somebody and really made something mad, and the next day or 2 days later, whatever, those people are coming back going like, "Hey, I'm in more pain now than I was when I came to see you." So what happened there was a bit of a learning experience, let's call it, and saying, "Okay, maybe I progressed this person too fast, or maybe I progressed them too soon." So I would say, back up, do your single leg touchdowns, right? Maybe do single leg touchdowns instead of being on one leg. Do that little single leg touchdown with a little bit of kickstand or a little bit of help with the arms or something like that. See how they manage. From there, maybe add a little bit of a step back or a step forward or a step up or something along those lines, one of those little steps, and see if you can get some of that movement down, or if they can get some of that movement down without being in some significant pain there. So just kind of going through the motions and trying things, and then if it doesn't work, go back to the drawing board. It's the same thing with coming up with a corrective exercise program for somebody who has a dysfunction, right? You go, oh, I can fix anterior pelvic tilt. I know this one. Okay, I got this. Here are the muscles I need to release. Here's the stuff I need to activate. Okay, cool, let's do it. And then all of a sudden you reassess, and looks worse than when you started. You have to go, all right, let's go back to the drawing board, right? Maybe I didn't do something. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I didn't do the exercises correctly, or those exercises weren't appropriate for that person. So that's a long-winded answer of keep trying, right? How about that? Pistol less irritating because the opposite leg wasn't adding force or torque. I don't know about that. Kind of being a pistol squat really is a difficult movement, even though that other leg isn't adding force or creating any sort of torque there. Um, I still think that's a lot of force and a lot of tension on that one side. And I think you get a lot of compensation there because it's a tough, especially for somebody who's taller like me, right? It's tough to see a 6'8" guy go down into a pistol squat. But yeah, it's one of those things. Like, listen, I can tell you, I have never done a pistol squat day in my life, and I really don't think I'm going to ever do one. Um, Especially all the way down to the ground and things like that. That's just not happening. So for me, I'm not a huge fan of it. Band with hip thrusts, absolutely. Strong like mom, absolutely. I know I torture you with them. Um, band with hip thrusts, great research out there. Again, in the hip thrust or hip bridge article, there's some great researchers that have studied that with abduction stimulus, doing those hip bridges. Phenomenal increase in glute activity there. So particularly glute medius. So I'm a bigger fan of doing the banded hip thrusts or hip bridge or whatever you want to call them, hip thrust, hip bridge with that banded resistance. I would much rather use that. Even going heavy, I could use that banded abduction stimulus there to help with those hip bridge or the hip thrust or hip bridge, whatever you want to call them. Actually, some of the research in that is from the glute guy himself of Brett Contreras. So that's some good stuff in there. And there's some other good researches in that article as well, or in that course as well. Cool, good questions, guys. All about the glutes, right? Let's see, scrolling down. Um, Athletes on game day, Ryan. What's up? Hope things to do on the sideline. That is a phenomenal question. So, yeah, anything that you can do on the sideline is kind of again depending on what sport, where you're playing, what you're doing, what you're coaching, whatever. But I would definitely incorporate kind of that corrective type stuff on the sideline. So some bands, right? They're easy. The mini bands, the super bands, bands with hand, whatever you got. I would certainly incorporate some of that stuff in there. So the mini band shuffles, the clamshells, the hip bridge, the quadrupeds, the ITYs. Again, I don't know what sport you're dealing with, so it really just depends. But all of that stuff would certainly would be good to have. Also, the soft tissue tools like the hypervolt, or the variations of those percussion vibration tools would be great to have. on the sideline. I know you see that kind of in the NBA. I think was the big one there. They always zoom in on the chairs and the hyperized stuff that they have. It's great, right? Having that is going to help them potentially with that performance or improved performance, and prevent some of that injury potentially. Right? Obviously, if you get hit by a 300-pound football player, you know there's not enough corrective exercise you can do that will prevent injury with that. But um, yeah, all that corrective exercise stuff I think would be great to incorporate onto the sideline. It doesn't have to be strenuous, right? That's where it can just be kind of like going through the motions. You see the guys kind of riding the bike like football. You see the guys riding the bike, right? Okay, it's fine. I'm not taking anything away from that, but maybe do, some minivan shuffles or some monster walks or some whatever instead. Or if you only have one bike on the sideline, have a couple guys doing like a little mini circuit to kind of stay warm. I think would be helpful. So hopefully that works, Ryan. Hopefully that's what you're looking for, and maybe that's what you're doing already as a super coach. Johnny, good question with the bridges. There's all kinds of variations. Keep your feet hip width apart. I think that's kind of my go-to cue, right? So if you think about that hip bridge, think about it as a deadlift or a squat. And as you do that hip bridge, keep those feet in kind of alignment, right? So keep them hip width apart, a little bit of tension on the band, not a ton of tension on the band, just a little bit of tension on that band, and go from there, right? That's kind of where I would stay with that one. Nothing too crazy, uh, nothing extreme, right? Don't be on the edge of your feet with your feet super or your knees super wide. I just don't think that's very, I don't know, quote unquote functional. Overhead squat, hands on hips, causes excessive forward lean. That is a great question. It's upper body dysfunction. It's something, it's lats, basically. So treat that as upper body dysfunction, Adonis. So if you do see that excessive forward lean show up with the hands on the hips and it wasn't there in the regular squat, upper body, right? Good question. That's a great question. And that's a great question to finish on because I got to get out of here. Guys, happy Friday. Guys and girls, happy Friday. Hope everybody's has a good weekend. Do something fun and amazing. Go be awesome. Um, and I'll see you guys. I'll see you guys next week. If I missed your question, I didn't mean to. You can comment. I'll answer it on Instagram here. But have a good weekend. Bye, guys. Go do great things.